Jillian, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have a chat with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So let's kick us off with your career story. Tell me a little bit about what does that look like?
So I've been in tech overall for almost 10 years now, and I've kind of been a little bit all over the place. So I started off as a software engineer. I moved up pretty quickly into a management role. I realized, it was a little soon for me. I thought it would be best to hone in on my engineering skills. So I transitioned companies and went back to an engineering position. I was there for about 5 years, and recently I moved into a product role. So I'm a technical product manager currently at a Series A startup called Canopy. Through that time, I did a little stint on the side of doing my own startup. But so I've kind of touched a little bit of everything at some point.
Nice. And so when I'm curious, did you study kind of computer science or software engineering, some kind of engineering background? Like what inspired you to go into engineering in the first place?
Yeah, so when I signed up for school, going off to college, it was not an option for me. My parents were like, "You're going to college. Neither of us went. You're doing it. No, figure it out." I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I just picked a random major, and I actually picked psychology. And right before I started, it was like a month prior to classes starting, I was like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember MySpace." Yeah.
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 Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I used to do I was the go-to person for customizing your MySpace page,
That's
basic
awesome.
HTML,
Yeah.
CSS. And I was just browsing. I went to Purdue Lafayette. I was just browsing their website and looking through different major options. And I seen computer information technology, and that kind of encompasses not just a pure CS degree, but web development, graphics, business analyst, any tech career you could think of, it kind of encompassed, and then you could kind of focus down from there. And I
Hmm.
was like, so are you telling me I could have a career like doing somewhat similar to what I did for MySpace and building these pages? That's amazing. Let's switch and do that.
Right.
Um, when I got into my major, it's pretty generic at the beginning, so I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I went to get my first internship, and I actually signed up as a business analyst. And 2 weeks before I started, they called me and they're like, "Hey, remember that offer we gave you to be a business analyst? Yeah, actually, we don't really need that, but can you be an engineer?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really have a lot of options. So yeah, let's do it." I've done, some coding as part of my degree as well. And I, did that for my internship, and I absolutely loved it. It really just reinforced, yes, this is what I want to be doing. So when I went back to school, I kind of took that track a little bit more than the business analyst, but I still got a little bit of everything.
Hmm.
So I, in a way, kind of fell into it. Um, but yeah, that's how I got started.
Nice, nice, nice. I'm always curious how people get started in their careers because then and it's always a similar story like that. It's and it's amazing because at that age you're probably like, oh my gosh, I really need to pick something that's so, it's and we put so much pressure on ourselves, but then somehow it all works out eventually. So
Right.
it's a good lesson for anybody who's listening and looking for some kind of change or maybe a fresh graduate. Or don't worry too much, everything will be fine. You'll find your
Right.
way. I'm curious. I want to kind of address some challenges or stereotypes that we often see in the tech world. So let's start with some easy ones. So there's this notion that when software developers, engineers go into that profession, they typically want to stay within the technical route. So rarely do people venture off. So the rumors, right? Rarely the people venture off to that people management piece or project management, product owner, because it requires you to communicate with so many different stakeholders. So what do you think about that? Do you see that that's the reality? Is that how it typically goes with techies, so to say?
I don't know if I would say that's as a generic statement across the board. I think it's more of a personality and interest traits. It's really up to the individual. For me, obviously, I did a little stint in people management, and now I'm in product management, which is really where my heart is. And I think I've really found my place now. But I would say I personally am like the most extroverted introvert you'll ever meet. So I like a balance of being on my own, but I also really like talking to people. So I think that the stereotype comes from most tech people that you see like in movies or TV are very, very introverted typically and don't really like talking to people. They'd rather just kind of be heads down coding, which may be true in a lot of cases. I don't think it's true across the board. And I think also as you go through your career, like I loved being 100% heads down, just building away all day when I started my career. And now I like talking to people. So having that option as well as, you know, I have a lot of individual work I need to do during the day as well. I think it's a good balance for me.
Hmm. Do you think there's a career impact for someone for, let's say, like, you know, when typically what I see in the world of, you know, but just information technology in general, whether people in cyber or they're in software development. So up until a certain point, you can kind of get, you know, everybody kind of can get to that mid-level, but it seems that there's that tipping point to get into a senior level roles. Even if you do stay on a technical track, it seems to be there's a different type of skills that you might need, which is like around soft skills, right? Like that stakeholder management skills, so communication. So do you see this as do you agree or disagree with that, or do you see that if you don't have these soft skills as a tech person, that it might stunt your growth in your career?
I would, in general, agree with that. I would say it probably depends on the company a little bit, but yeah, in general, you definitely need to have those soft skills as you move up, because as you move up, you start talking to people more, you start having to communicate and like do more technical writing and that sort of thing, which requires those soft skills as opposed to just being an IC individual contributor. You're again mostly heads down all day, so those soft skills aren't as important. But yeah, if you want to continue to move up and like hit that tipping point and get into like a senior role, even as an engineer, um, it's kind of like I don't want to say like an ongoing joke, but it is a little bit that like as the higher level engineer you are, the less you actually code,
Mm-hmm.
because more so than actually like heads down coding, you're working with a team to like figure out the design and the architecture and communicating that upwards and working with the PM and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, as you level up, it's more and more of having those soft skills become more and more important.
Mm. And so I don't, and I'm curious about your experience, because being tech for a few years and in different kind of wearing different hats, I often find myself at different conferences or, you know, some kind of events, especially now post COVID. I was actually at a conference just recently, and we took a picture, and I was like, and I was the only woman at the table. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then you look around and it's just like you go to conferences for, you know, software development type stuff, and it's just black and gray suits. That's all you see. You know, you see a handful of women. So do you see this changing? How do you experience similar kind of things?
Yeah, so I've absolutely experienced similar things, 100%. I do see a little bit of a change because there is that observation of like, oh, wow, there are not many women in tech or in STEM in general. So you do see more and more of those campaigns and trying to encourage younger women to get involved and have an interest in tech. For me personally, you know, like I said, I kind of fell into this.
Mm-hmm.
The area I grew up in, the high school I went to, the only computer class we had was keyboard. And then my best friend in college, when I met her, I was like, how are you so good at this already? Like, she was an amazing programmer. Actually, she went off to Carnegie Mellon, and then I think she works for LinkedIn now. She's incredible engineer. And she's like, oh, I started taking classes on engineering when I was 12.
Mm.
And I was like, whoa, that was not even on my radar at 12. So as it becomes more prevalent and a known, like, hey, this is a really good career, it's like up there with like doctor, lawyer status, I would say personally. And more classes come out, more knowledge and information gets shared. But yeah, like I said, I have absolutely experienced that. I think I had one woman on my team in my very first career, like the first year. But other than that, I have not had a woman on my team in the last 9 years.
Wow.
So that just really speaks to like, there are not a lot of us in tech.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, so I see the same. And I also see there's a lot of like initiatives coming out and like policies that like kind of, require companies to like, you need to, really kind of reach out for that talent, invest in that talent. And you made a good point about access to that education, access to those platforms, right? So and that's a big thing as well. And I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I will for just a little bit. But in terms of just the education system, it's like, when you're doing the 4-year degree, by the time you graduate, you may or may not even be using it. You might not even need it. But now I'm refreshed to see that there's so many other programs that are short-term, that are affordable, and people can get access to them. So really, it's about raising awareness, because a lot of young people, especially in low socioeconomic communities, don't even have the awareness sometimes. So I think kind of raising awareness on these subjects is absolutely essential, because there's a lot of really brilliant young people that just don't have access, or can't afford certain education, but a lot of other alternative programs that would open great doors for them to high paying roles and career paths they probably would not even imagine. So it's
100%. And you kind of mentioned that you had gone to conferences and you were the only woman in the room. Along those same lines of like having access and like spreading information. I actually went to a conference, I think it was in September, for women impacting tech. So getting all women from the area that are in a tech field together. That was super interesting. And it was amazing to like connect with women and have shared experiences and have those discussions. And there were a lot of like more junior level engineers there. Like I just graduated. This is my first time in my career. And up until that point, excuse me, I honestly didn't think I had like much to share. I was always like, oh, I have so much to learn. Like, what could I tell anyone? As they were asking me questions, I had the realization. I was like, oh, I have been in tech for a long time. I've been through a lot of the same things they have. Maybe I don't have something to teach everybody, but there's certainly a lot of people that I can help. And so I've kind of put more of a focus and emphasis on making myself available to people that, particularly women in tech, that are like looking for advice or just someone to talk to, or just ask questions in general. How did you handle this type of situation or that type of situation? Signing up to be a mentor, coming on podcasts, those types of things.
Yeah, I think that's very, very helpful. I'm curious, what do you think, let's say somebody's listening to a podcast right now, like, oh, I've been trying to break into tech. I've been trying, whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't matter, but just somebody who wants to get into tech, what would be a start? Is there a particular tool or platform that is maybe that is, I don't know, easy to learn, let's say, just to test yourself out? Like, am I made for this kind of world?
So I would say my biggest thing when I'm like trying to reach any type of goal, and so if your goal is to get into tech, I'd say start with the end in mind. Like, what is like the actual position that you want? Like, think about what interests you and what you like working on, because a lot of people think of getting into tech and they're like, oh, well, I'm not an engineer. What am I going to do? Well, that doesn't, yeah, there's 100 other jobs outside of engineering that can be, I actually had someone ask me, like, what does it mean to be in tech? And for me, it just means that you work at a tech first company. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're an engineer or you work in infrastructure or anything like that. So think about what you like to do. Do you like working with people or not? Do you want to just stay more of an individual contributor? Look at, and like, if you want to go engineering route, look at job descriptions. If you want to go into, I'm in a product management role at this point, look at job descriptions for that, whatever it may be. Go find actual job descriptions, see what it's listing on there. What are the skills you need to gain? And then figure out how you get those skills. So if it's an engineering route, of course, the obvious answer is you can go to school, but like you mentioned, it's not everyone has access to those resources. I actually work with a woman. She works on our front end engineering team. She 100% taught herself how to code.
That's awesome.
With just free online resources. So it's available, it's out there. You know, the internet is the greatest resource you can ever have. You don't think you're limited by your ability to go to school or not, even if it takes you, 5 years to get through all of the content on your own. It's out there. It's worth it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much out there. It's just going through all those resources and finding what works. I think I agree with you in terms of just having that goal and like what's the ultimate. And I always find it interesting also to kind of look at LinkedIn profiles of people that maybe you're like, oh, well, what does that role look like for somebody who's actually doing it, and what was their career story? And I think it's inspiring to see that you don't, like you said, like you don't need to come even from that tech background. You don't need to be a tech, doesn't mean you need to be a coder day in, day out. There's so many other pathways. Even the business analyst opportunities, those are also very much within the tech sector. So in terms of kind of just upskilling and growing, it's continuously changing, the world of tech, no matter which platform or tool people are using. So what sort of things do you do on a regular basis? How do you stay on top of everything that you need to be aware of in the tech world?
Well, actually, I'll say when I made the transition from engineering into product, there was a whole plethora of reasons why I made that transition. And I sat on it for like a year and laid out like, what does this mean for me in the long run? Why am I doing this? What interests me? Is this going to be the right decision ultimately? Because it's a big thing to give up your engineering role and go into a completely different path. And one of the reasons, I wouldn't say it was the main reason, but one of the reasons that I considered was to be a software engineer, to be especially like that top 1%, to be a top tier engineer, you really have to stay on it and stay up to date and continually learn. And while I love continually learning, it's a lot for like that very technical role. And I tend to worry way too far into the future, to be honest. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do in 30 years from now? What's my life going to look like? And I was like, if I have a family eventually, like, I'm not sure that I could keep pace to be a top tier engineer. So making a little bit of a transition to a role that is still technical, because that's very much still a passion of mine, but has a more of a focus on those soft skills that we talked about.
Yeah, that's the thinking ahead is the analytical person in you.
Yeah.
That's the analytical mindset that you have. I see this quite often with people that are in tech, especially like engineers and very analytical people, because they need to have that plan. It has to be perfect versus like on the some people from different industries, whether maybe in the creative world, they're a little bit more like, oh, we're just gonna go with the flow. So it's very interesting to see personalities and kind of where I'm more on that go with the flow person. So when I have to adjust myself significantly when I work with software developers to kind of just get on their mindset level, and be like, okay, I need them to understand where I'm coming from, and to be able to kind of help them process it in the way that works for them. So I always find the personality difference interesting. So I'm curious also, so right now you're working with Canopy, so and you guys are, I assume, I mean, part of this, obviously, I mean, even being on this podcast, it's a way to kind of promote women in tech, right? Is there something particular you guys are doing to kind of encourage more women to join your company in your roles?
I would say, like I said, being on this podcast, putting the information out there. Canopy is a pre-Series B startup, so we're still quite small. So just getting our name out there and saying, hey, this is a really fantastic place to work, and getting that firsthand review from another woman that's like, hey, I'm in tech, I'm at this startup, it's an incredible place to work. That is step one. From there, I would say in general, Canopy is amazing at being incredibly inclusive, and it's probably the most open place I've felt, where I didn't feel like I was being judged for like my gender or my age or anything like that. And I can't speak for everyone else, but I would like to genuinely say it appears that applies across the board. We're very, very open and inclusive, and want to make everyone feel welcome. One of the things about Canopy is it's really big on its values, and it's one of the main reasons that I joined. And a lot of companies put values up on their website and then, they never look at them again. Like, would they really own their values? And some of those are empathy and transparency. And I think as a woman in tech, that makes for a much more welcoming environment.
Hmm. And I just have a couple more questions for you, but one big topic that everybody talks about in the tech industry is burnout. So because, it's very, and sometimes intensive hours, there's a lot of detail, a lot of focus, a lot of time sitting down, a lot of, it's a heavy job for many people, right? Just because the nature of it. So how do you find that balance? And, is there anything you guys do as a company to kind of help create that balance of work and, rest?
So it's kind of a twofold question, like how I handle it and then how my company handles it. I would actually say my company handles it way better than I do. Like I said, when I was looking for roles, I was looking to transition into product, but I was very particular about the company I wanted to work for. And one of the things that stood out to me about Canopy was they really stand by, they have an unlimited vacation policy, first of all, and they're huge on having that balance. I work on the product team. Our head of product is constantly reiterating, like, hey, take breaks between meetings, go on walks during the day. It's very important that you stay in that creative headspace. You mentioned earlier, like personality traits and me being very analytical. It's something I genuinely have to like remind myself every day, like, hey, you need to take a break, because the type where I'm like, if I have something on a list that needs to be done, I just go heads down and we'll just crank away at it until it's done. Like, I have a hard time walking away in the middle of things. So, answering your question of how do you find that balance, I think it's one, find the right company that values balance and values, creative headspace, and understands that, grinding all day long isn't the way that you get people to be creative and happy and grow in their careers. But also being mindful of yourself. And, when you look at the clock and you're like, oh, I've been sitting here for 5 hours. I should get up, take a walk, stretch, have a break, and actually utilize your PTO. I mentioned Canopy has an unlimited PTO policy. They actually mean that. People take their vacation. It's kind of a thing in the tech industry where companies will say we have unlimited PTO, and then you talk to any of the employees and they're like, yeah, but we don't ever take any of it. So
like there's no time, there's no space,
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
I think there's a good tip you gave earlier of like going on the company website and actually looking at the profile of people that work there and work in the role, and see if they've like left reviews or what they say they work on. So that's also a good way to like find the right company that values that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can spot culture of a company very easily these days through just their digital presence. I think reviews are there. You can kind of see how long people stay, the tenure of people. So there's a lot of ways to kind of spot the company culture. And I think websites, LinkedIn, the Glassdoor kind of things are a great way to kind of collect that information. So definitely. Before I ask you a last question, where do you hang out at socially, like social platforms? And if somebody wants to get in touch with you or maybe visit Canopy, where would be the best place to find you?
I would say LinkedIn is definitely the best place. I have a Twitter. I'm not really on there very much, so that's more of a long shot. But yeah, definitely LinkedIn is the place to go for both myself and for the company.
All right, great. And the last question, Jillian, is, what is the question you wish people ask themselves more often? What is one question that you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Why am I doing this? Just asking yourself why, being really mindful, because it's very, very easy, especially in like a typical 9-to-5 job, to get caught up in the motions and just kind of go through and get into like a robotic routine. So ask yourself everything you're doing, why am I doing this? Does it make me happy? Is it going to bring value? Is it going to provide impact? Or am I just going through the motions?
That's a powerful question. It's not an easy one either, because sometimes it requires to face our own realities.
Yeah.
So no, that's beautiful. Jillian, thank you so much for being on a podcast. And I look forward to hopefully attending events when you're there, and hopefully we won't be the only two women in the room.
That would be amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.